What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Week 10 waiver wire ads. This is the biggest bye week on the season with Denver, Jacksonville, Houston, New England, Philly, and Washington all on bye. So it is entirely possible you need to find someone to play this week. Unfortunately, still not that great out there on the waiver wire, but what can you really expect in week 10? Remember, I always record this prior to the Monday night game, so if anything big happens in that, someone big gets hurt, then just look at the pinned comment that also has the timestamps. That's where I'll post any updates. And if you're watching this a few minutes after it's released, the timestamps are in the description. So let's start things off at running back this week with Ronald Jones. Now, the Bucs backfield rotation has been just infuriating this season. Not just because they've been giving touches to Peyton Barber, but because of how inconsistent it's been. Jones has played anywhere from 7 to 42 snaps. He has 2 games with 4 touches, but also 2 games with 20 touches. It'll look like they finally realize they should be using him in 1 week, but then Barber comes out the next week and gets like 15 touches. So I get it if you want to just stay completely away from the situation, but Ronald Jones is the better back between Peyton Barber and himself, and he had 18 of the team's 23 backfield carries this week to go along with 2 receptions, while getting twice as many snaps as Dare and 4 times more than Barber. So it looks like Ronald Jones has taken over, and he's still available in 60% of leagues. So I would go out and get him, but I understand if you just don't want to. Derrius Guice is another name. He should be activated and be able to play in week 11. He still won't be out there this week. So week 11 is the first week that he can actually play in a game. The problem with him is that Peterson's actually been great in recent weeks, and Washington is still terrible. So it's not like when they activate Guice, they're going to be like, all right, bye Peterson. We're going to do a healthy scratch like we did earlier in the season. He's still going to be there. So you're just going to have a committee on a team that's really, really bad. It is possible that to close out the season, they just want to see what they have in him. Because remember, he only has 13 career touches after being taken in the 2nd round last season. So they probably want to know, is this a guy we can game plan around for next season? And they haven't, I'm sure, really figured that out yet. So in the last 3 weeks of the season, do they give him a lot more touches? I don't know, but it's possible. So he could be usable down the stretch. But again, not a guy I would put a claim in for. I want to mention JD McKissic because I think a lot of people are going to want to add him this week. But I would pump the brakes on that one. He was in on just 42% of snaps last week, which is still fine, but he only had 7 touches, and it kind of felt like best case scenario for him. He got a few receptions, he got the touchdown, but he's never going to be a guy that you can rely on. Like, there will not be a week this season where you're going into the playoffs and you're like, all right, I feel great about my team. I got McKissic in the flex. That's not going to happen. So I don't think it's worth wasting a roster spot on him outside of, say, 16-team leagues or full PPR leagues that have a deep bench. But I thought I'd mention him because he did score, and people are going to look at the points and be like, oh, here's a running back that scored points. Maybe he's the next Theo Riddick. Listen, really don't think he's all that great of a player. Could he get 3 or 4 receptions in a few different weeks? Sure, but he's never going to be a guy you can rely on. I also need to make sure that I give Alexander Mattison his weekly 10 seconds. He's one of the highest upside handcuffs you can have. Yes, Abdullah was involved this week, but Mattison's the backup, and that's the role we're looking for. We don't want to add Abdullah just because he had some receptions and he scored a touchdown. The only reason you have Alexander Mattison is if Dalvin Cook goes down, in which case Abdullah's role doesn't really change, but Mattison's does. Let's move on to the wide receiver position, and we'll start off with some very unfortunate news. Our boy Preston Williams is out for the season with a knee injury. He was doing great, and he was finally having his breakout game, so it really stinks that he got hurt. But this means that Parker should probably be owned in like 80% of leagues, not available in 80% of leagues like he is. He's scored 4 touchdowns in his last 5 games, and he has a season-long pace, if you remove the Patriots game, of 64 receptions for 914 yards and 9 touchdowns. So he's going to see a slight bump. We're not expecting DeVante Parker to go out there and get like 12 or 13 targets a game. Realize that these targets that Williams was getting is going to be distributed amongst all players. So it's really only going to be like 1 or 2 extra targets a week for Parker. But since he was already a player that was producing, this just solidifies his role in the offense on a team that's not great but will always have garbage time. So he should be one of your top wide receiver targets if you need depth at the position. I'd also look at Zach Pascal. He now has 6 and 7 targets in the 2 games that T.Y. Hilton has missed. It's possible that Brissett misses some time, but Brian Hoyer is one of the better backups in the league. So while he is a downgrade, it's not like they won't be able to move the ball at all while Brissett is out. Hilton is expected to miss a few more weeks, so Pascal could be valuable if he's going to get 6 or 7 targets a game against Miami, Jacksonville, and Houston. Those aren't the greatest matchups in the world, but especially this week. We got 6 teams on bye, and he's playing Miami as the clear number 1 receiver on the Colts, who are still going to probably score around 30 points. So if you need someone for this week, I think Pascal's a really good option on free agency. I'll briefly mention 2 more wide receivers. They're available in 40 and 45% of leagues, so for a lot of you out there, they are still an option. Marquise Brown was dropped in 8% of leagues, so he's now available in 40%. He played limited snaps on Sunday as he works back from not only the foot and ankle injury, but then he actually popped up with a thigh injury as well late last week. But he's got massive upside each week when he's 100% healthy. I can't be sure if he's going to reach 100% health to end the season, but it looks like he's trending towards being healthy. So I definitely want to get him on my bench because of that upside. And then also Jamison Crowder out there in 45% of leagues. Sam Darnold is shaken at this point. I mean, he performed pretty badly against even the Dolphins. So the end of season outlook for him is looking a lot worse than it did a few weeks ago. And it's possible that he just can't get back on track this season. But Crowder will still be viable in fantasy even if Sam stinks. So he should only be available in like 10 or 20% of leagues, not over 45%. So I definitely go out and get him if he's available. We'll move on to tight end. And the big name I have for tight end is Jacob Hollister. There were some whispers prior to Sunday's game that suggested Hollister could see an expanded role, especially given the matchup. But I obviously no one expected him to score multiple touchdowns. He didn't exactly slide into Will Dissly's role, and this was, like I said, a really nice matchup for tight ends. So we're not getting too excited for this one, but he did post a 4 for 37 and 2 stat line, and he does have receiving talent. But what matters more than anything is opportunity, right? And in week 7, he played 52% of snaps, saw 6 targets, and caught 3 for 20 yards. In week 8, plays 35% of snaps, catching both targets for 18 yards. And then last week, jumps up to 75% of snaps, catching 4 of 6 targets for 37 yards and the 2 touchdowns. So the snaps have gone up. But what's more exciting is where these snaps are. More than half of his snaps have come from the slot or out wide over the last 3 weeks. That means his offensive involvement isn't a fluke. The 2 touchdowns are. You shouldn't expect that moving forward. But his production in the offense from a volume standpoint is not a fluke if he's going to be playing 75% of snaps, and for half or more of those snaps, he's in the slot or out wide. And then you consider his chemistry with Wilson can only improve moving forward. So it's not like this is a slam dunk pickup or anything, but I know a lot of people are in need of a tight end. And if you've got a tight end playing for Russell Wilson and he's going to start trusting him and he's out there on passing downs, then you can do a lot worse. And it doesn't hurt that he faces the Cardinals championship weekend. To be honest, that's really it for waiver tight ends. You could also add Vance or Goedert if they're available. They're still only owned in about half of leagues, but Vance's quarterback really limits his upside, and Goedert is certainly fine to own. Just know that his ceiling is there. Why we like him is if Ertz goes down. Until that happens, he's fine, but he's not going to reach his full ceiling, whereas Hollister has a ceiling if they're going to start involving him in the offense as much as they did Will Dissly before he was hurt. So he doesn't need an injury to hit his ceiling. Goedert kind of does. Let's talk about some quarterback streamers now. The top option is Jameis Winston, who's somehow a free agent in 35% of leagues. I think a bunch of people dropped him after his poor game against the 49ers and then don't want to add him because he's not all that great of a quarterback. But he's a quarterback 11 in points per game this season, and he gets a home matchup with Arizona this week. So he should be closer to 95% owned, not 65%. You've also got Rivers at Oakland. The Raiders are one of the bigger pass funnels in the league. They're really solid against the ground game, not so good against the pass. And at least for the moment, the Chargers offense is relatively healthy, so he should have a good week. On the other side, you can play Carr versus the Chargers. Always nice playing quarterbacks at home. And despite how poorly Rodgers played on Sunday, the Chargers aren't that great of a defense. And the game should have a decent total. The total's not out as I'm recording this, but I expect it to be relatively high. So Carr is a solid option. And then if all of those guys are owned, then I can promise you that no one owns Brian Hoyer. If Brissett misses this week, then Hoyer will get a home matchup with the Dolphins. I'm sure the Colts will run the ball a ton in that matchup, so the volume will very likely not be there for Hoyer, but he should still have a good game, and he will have a nice touchdown ceiling if things break his way. Defense streamers. The Panthers are one of the best defenses in the league, and yet they're available in about 30% of leagues. They don't have a great matchup in Lambeau against Rodgers, but if they're available, then you should definitely pick them up. Same with the Steelers. They have double-digit fantasy points in 6 straight weeks, and yet they're available in over 35% of leagues. They have a tough matchup as well at the Rams, but I would still pick them up just like the Panthers. The Colts have at least 8 fantasy points in 4 straight, and they get a home matchup with the Dolphins. Then the Ravens also get to play the Bengals' embarrassment of an offense. They could have AJ Green back, but it's not going to matter all that much. They still stink. All right, let's order these guys for waivers. So the order that I would claim players in, so actually put a claim in, use Fab to get, would be Jamison Crowder, Marquise Brown, Zach Pascal, Jacob Hollister, with Jacob Hollister moving higher in the list if you really need a tight end and you don't need a wide receiver. Then Ronald Jones, same thing. If you really need a running back, he would move up ahead of the wide receivers. And then DeVante Parker. The order for just adding players is quarterback streamers, because we never claim a quarterback. Defense streamers, Alexander Mattison, JD McKissic only in a full PPR league if you really need a running back. Then Vance McDonald, Dallas Goedert, and Derrius Guice. Hopefully you have an IR spot for the Derrius Guice one, because then you can just add him, put him in IR, and you get to add another player. So that is it for the Week 10 waiver wire video. Again, if anything crazy happens in the Monday night game, just look at the pinned comment for any sort of update. I'll be doing trade targets next, then start sit videos later in the week. So be on the lookout for those. But that's the end of this one. I hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And if you're new here, how about subscribing to the channel? But thanks for watching.